Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Therion, Leviathan 2 on October 28th on Nuclear Blast. The album has 12 tracks, 51 minutes in length, and this is the band's 18th full-length studio record. They are a Swedish symphonic metal band. Now this is part 2 of a 3-part trilogy. Third part comes out in 2023, and for an album with that backdrop, I was expecting the design to be a lot better. This record doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end, it's just the middle. You feel like you've been parachuted into a story and you're not really sure how you got there, how you're going to get out of there. What is the purpose of this record? The album really leaves the listener wondering. Not the design that I want from a record that has this sort of atmosphere, that has this sort of backdrop, that it's part of a much larger picture. The design is flawed. It doesn't add to the playability of the album while giving it fluidity. The fluidity is not uninterrupted, which is exactly what this album needed. From a soundscape point of view, the album is very thin. It depends heavily on symphonic elements, orchestrations, choirs, and that takes a little bit of the heaviness out of the record. It takes a little bit of the metal out of the album. When you have a record like this, you create volume. You feel like you're filling in all the gaps, but you're filling in all the gaps with a very thin layer of sound. And that thin layer of sound is not enough for the listener to really hold on to. It creates a cinematic backdrop, but it feels more like a movie score than it does an actual metal record. And I'm not a big fan of this approach, specifically because it was an approach that didn't create movement within the songs. It just made everything stay exactly where it was. You felt like not just the design of the record is the middle, the songs themselves don't necessarily have a beginning and end. They just feel like interludes, extended interludes, because of this heavily use of symphonic elements of orchestrations and choirs. Now some songs, not every song is like that, some songs do have some heavier drums, some heavier guitars. It's just that it's not consistent from beginning to end. And I'm not saying every song needed to have it. You can create ebbs and flows by allowing some tracks to have a little bit more heaviness and allowing some other tracks maybe to be more symphonic, more atmospheric. But this album really moves the pendulum towards one side too heavily, because the tracks that have a little bit more sound to them, or a little bit more texture to their sound, with the drums creating more of an impact or the guitars creating more of an impact, they balance out the record a lot better, and you can still feel the symphonic drive even in those songs, so nothing is taken away. When you create an album that heavily pushes everything to one side of the spectrum, you just unbalance the experience and you unbalance the sound within that experience. The drums on this album could have been thicker, they could have been warmer. I'm not saying that they should have been heavier, but they could have had more of an impact on how you perceive the overall experience of listening to this album. I felt at times that the drums were not even there. They didn't have a fingerprint to them. They didn't have a pattern of usage of how you're going to implement them into the tracks and what impact you're going to give the tracks with that implementation. The same could be said for the guitars. While there's interesting moments in a few of the tracks on this record, the guitars don't have a purpose that stays connected across each and every single song. Sometimes they're pushing the tracks forward with a lot of heaviness, with thickness, with power, adding metal to the symphonic elements, and sometimes they're barely there. They're just a breeze. They're overshadowed by everything else that is happening, like the orchestrations, the choirs, and the overall symphonic elements. I wanted a little bit better definition of those two elements, because I honestly feel like they could have given the songs a little bit more meat on the bone, giving them a little bit more substance, making them a little bit more intriguing. This album at times loses all its allure. It's not an intriguing record because it just feels like everything that it has, it's putting it right in front of you. The only element that's not overshadowed by this sound design are the vocals. The vocals are phenomenal on this record. Lori's voice is outstanding. She creates incredible ebbs and flows. A lot of the songs that feel a lot of very linear sound-wise, she's able to change that dynamic ever so slightly with her approach and her range. But all vocalists on this album added value to the overall construction. The choirs are phenomenal as well. I just felt like they were overused. But the vocals are one of the highlights, if not the only real highlight that this album offers. They surpass everything else. They leave everything else in the dust, and they become the focal point of your attention more often than not. There's a few songs here and there where they take a little bit of a backseat to the overall atmospheric soundscape, but they are one of the few, if not the only bright spot and the only consistent spot in terms of quality and performance from beginning all the way to the end. I'm not a huge fan of this band, and I wasn't a huge fan of Leviathan, the first installment, but this record just feels incomplete. It feels like a placeholder. It honestly feels like an overall interlude, an album made of interludes. Not what I was hoping for. I wanted this album to be better defined in its purpose, in its design, in its sound, and it wasn't. This album feels lackluster. It really took all the air out of the balloon. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Alchemy of the Soul. The choirs and vocals are outstanding on this track. They really work well with one another. They offer warmth to the sound, they offer layers, and they offer texture. One of the few tracks that you have all of these elements coming together as one. The vocal arrangements are one of the elements that makes the vocal stand so well and so outside the box from beginning all the way to the end. The song has a beginning, middle, and end, something that is not true necessarily throughout the entire record, but this song really stands out from that perspective. It feels complete. It has a cinematic, symphonic experience, something you're going to see throughout the record, but one that feels more balanced, that has more cohesive nature to it because of how all the elements come in, and a little bit more thickness, a little bit more power on the guitars and drums really helps define that sound experience a lot better. Now, to me, the best track on this entire record is Midnight Star, perhaps the most driven, heavy, dark song. And when I mean heavy and dark, those two elements are really pushing one off of the other. It does have bigger sound. The drums have a much bigger impact on this track than any other track on the album, and the guitars also have a much bigger impact on this track than any other on the album. Now, that heaviness of sound from drums and guitars creates a little bit of that dark atmosphere that permeates throughout the entire song. A song that has texture, that has volume, that has substance, that moves really well. It's very dynamic. It's a very dynamic track, a very fluid track, using the choirs as a dark interlude towards the middle end of the song also works really well, because you're bringing an element that's predominant throughout the entire record, but you're bringing in with a different purpose in mind, which is enhancing the atmosphere that the track had before and that the track is trying to put forward on a consistent basis. That darkness that at the beginning you got it from the sound, during that interlude you're getting it from the vocal choir performance, really making the song feel complete once again from start to finish, and making it complete with something to hold on to, some layers for you to peel, which is really, it makes the song more interesting, and it's really important for any listener. Last but not least, Cavern Cold as Ice, more of a ballad style track as far as the sound and the vocal performance is concerned. There is substance, but the substance with this track is very soft. This song has a soft experience to it, soft in the sound, soft in the vocal performance, which makes the track feel thin. One of those thin tracks that doesn't necessarily have a beginning or end. The only reason I consider this one of my favorite songs on the album, even though it has a lot of elements that I don't really like and a lot of elements that are predominant throughout this entire record, is the vocal performance. Because the vocal performance, the softness of the vocal performance matches the softness of the sound. One is not working against the other. They are actually working in unison, and that's what gives this song that ballad feel to it from beginning to end. Because of that consortium of sound and vocals, everything moving at the same pace, at the same time, with the same direction, with the same purpose in mind, I'm able to forget about the fact that I didn't feel like this song had all the three different factors in it. It just felt like an extended interlude, but an extended interlude that works really well sound-wise and vocally, and therefore became one of my favorite songs as I went through this record multiple times. Let me know your thoughts on Therion, Leviathan 2, out October 28th on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.